Okay, I'm going to start off by talking about Unit 8, which you should see on my screen here, okay, which is e-commerce. So here's the way I'm going to work these lectures for this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do called the boring textbook lecture material. Okay, I'll do one of those for each unit, and those will be separate videos. And then I'm also going to do an actual demonstration. I'll put away the slides and I'll record some actual demonstrations of some of the things that I'm talking about today. So those will be separate videos for you. So you can get past the boring textbook material and move on to the more interesting demos part of it. Okay. All right, so the first one is e-commerce. Let's talk about that. This is buying and selling goods via the internet or services as well. Okay. E-commerce has really enabled our post-COVID recovery as much as we can, right? So, the things that we've done in COVID, the e-commerce that we do, getting deliveries, getting groceries, all those things are made possible because of electronic or e-commerce platforms. Now, e-commerce is a relatively recent invention. So there have been attempts before the World Wide Web to do e-commerce. And so in the 1980s, we had things like CompuServe and Prodigy and America Online. And these allowed very small types of transactions over electronic mechanisms. But we really didn't have a good e-commerce platform until the late 90s, okay? And even in the late 90s, we were still talking about the payment systems were pretty what would you call it? Rudimentary, I guess is the right word, okay? So let's talk a bit about that. Now, there were companies that existed in the I guess mid 90s, around 94. Okay? There were several companies that were founded to do electronic commerce on the internet. And so you've got the Amazons. Okay? Amazon's obviously still around. They're a much bigger company. They don't just sell books anymore, but at the time they launched selling books. Okay? Then you had companies that did the payment side of that. So CyberCash, First Virtual. These were how you paid for things. I guess in a way you could kind of think of them as today's PayPal, Bitcoin, that sort of thing. Okay? But they were effectively their own digital currency or digital payment system that hid your credit card information, because at the time you couldn't hide your credit card information. There was no encryption when the internet first became used for commerce. There was no encryption. So if you typed in your credit card number in a form on a website, anybody who was sitting there watching that network could see your credit card information. There was no encryption. And there really wasn't a good way to protect your information. So CyberCash came up with the concept of what would be very similar to what Bitcoin is today, although a completely different implementation. So nothing like today. Think of it like the great grandmother or grandfather of Bitcoin. Okay? But it was basically a digital currency. And then First Virtual took a different approach. What they did was they had a electronic mechanism that they called the virtual PIN. Okay. And what would happen is you would go to a website, you'd say, I want a virtual PIN, you'd sign up for a virtual PIN, you'd get an application number. Then you'd call into one of those interactive voice response telephone systems that was not connected to the internet. And it would ask you for your application number, and then it would ask you to enter your credit card information. And then it would tokenize or make a representation of your credit card information that linked back to your virtual PIN. And then you would get a notice that your virtual PIN had been created and it was associated with a credit card. Now, this process wasn't immediate. So I was one of the, not early employees, but I was one of the employees who had access to run the credit card machines and stuff like that. So whenever there was a problem, I was one of the people who went into the secure vault, and I'm not joking, it was literally a vault. And I would go in and I'd have access to the computer system to go figure out why someone's credit card declined or whatever it might be, right? So it was a very rudimentary system at the time. It was, when I was still in college. So it tells you how old I am. All right, so we had this system called the virtual PIN. It was pretty rudimentary. At the time, you couldn't really use it to buy physical goods. So if I wanted to go buy a computer, I would call up Dell and then I would give my credit card over the phone. That's how I would buy a computer. I couldn't buy computers online. There were no websites that sold computers. At the time, information was what people thought would be sold online. So you subscribe to a joke a day, right? And you pay a subscription fee for that. That's where people thought electronic commerce was going to go. Well, they were completely wrong. Yes, people will pay for information today, but people are less likely to pay for information than they are to pay for a service or a good. Okay, so the company that invented that first virtual was actually a Southern California company, not a Silicon Valley company. They ended up going out of business. Well, first they changed their business model to do more messaging. So they created email spam, so you can thank them. And then they did targeted advertising like banner ads and things like that that annoy you today. And a bunch of other things related to that. And then they basically got acquired by a company called DoubleClick, and then DoubleClick is now part of Google. So I guess you could say that they are this ancestor of a portion of Google's business, particularly the AdSense and AdWords side. Okay, but that was a long time ago, and so a lot of things have changed. So we started seeing the credit card companies actually encouraging people to use their credit cards online. So they started providing secure methods to do credit card processing. And so the secure sockets layer SSL or transport layer security TLS, which are how we do things today, that is how we started doing e-commerce with those payment systems. Okay. There is something very important on value chains from Michael Porter in the book. So look at 173 and 174 of chapter 8. Okay. It's very important to look at. Might be on the exam. All right, so let's talk about e-commerce versus traditional commerce. So we're seeing a mixture of this today, but in the beginning, there was a clear delineation between e-commerce and traditional commerce. So this is actually something that really happened. So around the same time we worked for that startup, I didn't make a lot of money. So I ended up working at Staples in Solana Beach, okay? And one of the things I thought about when I worked at Staples was, gosh, Staples doesn't even have a website. Well, then they got a website, but all you could do is go out there and here, you can send us an email or you can call us, but there was no way to buy anything on their website. And I remember being really irritated by this and somehow finagling my way into my manager getting a call with the chief technology officer of Staples. And talking to this guy and telling him that I thought that they should do commerce online. And the guy laughed at me. He thought I was nuts. And he said, this internet thing is a fad. It's never going to take off. Nobody is ever going to want to buy things online. Okay. So they didn't have a website where you could buy anything. And I remember thinking, this is stupid because everybody else is doing this. And then it hit. E-commerce just hit like crazy. If you had .com in your name, you could have a ton of money and you could hire a bunch of people and you could piss away all that money, okay? And people started building real electronic commerce experiences. So Amazon grew, you had Yahoo, later you had Google, you had the pets.com, which is pretty famous for being a disaster. Webvan started doing online grocery deliveries. This is 20 years ago, mind you, okay? And then the stock market collapsed. And we kind of went to a retrenchment where we no longer had these types of businesses. You had to be a sustainable business to survive. A lot of other things happened. And we went through a couple of different shifts, Web 1.0 and then Web 2.0, and now we're in Web 3.0, okay? But all of that happened. And in parallel, we also had a lot of infrastructure build out for networking. And this really opened it up to broadband in our homes here in the US, because back in those days, broadband was pretty darn slow. And the only place you could get broadband, and it was still pretty experimental, were the big cities. So I got the first broadband in the San Francisco Bay Area for homes, okay? And it was a whopping 1 megabit per second. To give you kind of a comparison, if you watched my video on networking, you'll see my current internet connection is 500 megabits per second, okay? And there are faster ones out there than that. Just happens to be my neighborhood hasn't been upgraded. Okay. So there's a lot of things that went into building e-commerce and where it is today. Okay? We also had the iPhone, and then later the Android came out. That allowed mobile internet to really take off. Before that point, there was mobile internet. It was rudimentary. It sucked. Believe me, I had one of the early WAP browser phones. It was terrible. And not many people used it because it was complicated. So the iPhone and Android really enabled that mobile commerce to take off. In parallel, we also had the launch of the App Store for Apple. Okay, and I remember Steve Jobs saying famously, "Oh, we're not going to build native apps on these phones. They're going to be web-based apps because that's the future." Guess what? Most of the apps on our phone now are native apps. Okay, so that's really allowed us to take off and have these applications that are purpose-built for things like Instacart and whatever other applications you might use, Postmates or delivery services, Grubhub, whatever. Okay, so getting back to e-commerce versus traditional commerce. With traditional commerce, we can have a physical presence. Maybe we had a catalog at one point, but we are primarily a physical presence. Now, within e-commerce, sometimes we have a traditional retailer who also adds an online presence. That's pretty common these days. But again, back in the early days, it wasn't. So we have things like Best Buy. They're a physical retailer first, but they have a pretty decent online presence. Then you had Sears. Sears had a horrible online presence. They missed the boat. They were the Amazon of their time, but they missed the boat. Okay? That ship sailed, and now they're bankrupt. Okay? Maybe they'll go bankrupt again. Who knows? Then we have different e-commerce models. So we're going to talk a bit about this. So we've got the merchant model, where we've just shifted a traditional model to the internet. That's Amazon's approach, by the way. Okay? Now, okay, let me rephrase that. That was Amazon's approach in the beginning. We have a brokerage where we bring buyers and sellers together. We create a marketplace, so to speak. That's eBay. Okay? eBay doesn't stock any products themselves. Then we have the advertising model. I'm going to sell ads to people and businesses, and then I provide free content. Google uses that model. Okay? Then Google's actually shifting more towards the mixed model, okay, as I'll talk about now. So the mixed model is where we've got multiple sources of revenue. So Amazon has their website where they actually sell products. They also have their marketplace where they sell products from other vendors. But their biggest source of profit is actually Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services is a cloud provider. And all of us use Amazon Web Services even if we don't know it. Okay? So if you watch Netflix, they are one of Amazon's biggest customers. The entire Netflix platform actually runs on Amazon, which you think, well, that's kind of weird because Amazon does movies and TV shows as well. Well, clearly people are still going to Netflix and Hulu and these other places because the Amazon interface sucks. I absolutely hate using it. Amazon has their toes in a lot of different areas. Now, Google's shifting to that direction as well. They're trying to diversify their revenue stream. So yes, they do ads. That's the biggest source of their revenue. But they've also got their other bets, which is why they formed the parent company, Alphabet. So they put all their bets underneath there as subsidiaries. Okay? So with Google, they have Google Cloud Platform, which is like Amazon Web Services. Okay? And some of you are going to be brave enough to try Amazon Web Services and now Google Cloud Platform because the codes for Google Cloud Platform are now posted as an announcement. So thank you, Matt, for doing that. Those codes are now posted, so you can get one if you want to do that. Okay. Absolutely free, no credit card required. That's another source of revenue for Google. We also have merchants like Microsoft who have historically been a software company. And they've dipped their toes in a lot of different areas, entertainment, et cetera. They've owned encyclopedias in the past. They don't anymore. They have the Bing search engine, so they have some advertising revenue, I'd imagine, if people actually use Bing. But they also have Microsoft Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud platform. So you see a pattern. These big tech companies have a cloud platform that they can then lease to other companies. Okay? It's another form of e-commerce, which then enables other e-commerce providers to build on the platform. If I were a small company starting out and Amazon, Google, and Microsoft do not have these web services available, and let's just, for the sake of argument, just assume that Alibaba and their cloud doesn't exist. There are no cloud providers. I'm a small mom and pop, and I want to start selling products online. I would have to go out, build a technology team, buy hardware, buy software, lease a space in a data center, sign a long-term contract with AT&T for a telecom service. Okay? And I would have to do all of these things before I ever earned $1 of money. Okay? Now think about that for a moment. That's how things were 20 years ago, and that is one of the reasons why a lot of the companies in the first .com era failed, because they had to spend millions of dollars on these things in order to get off the ground. So before they even earned $1 of revenue, they were paying out millions of dollars a month in fixed costs that they could not deal with. With cloud providers, this has opened it up, and really, I like to refer to it as making it a democracy for businesses. So it doesn't matter if you're the biggest company in the world or you're the smallest company in the world. You all have equal footing to go get these services, the software, the infrastructure, and only pay as you go. So when you have 0 customers, you don't need a whole lot. You can probably get away with the free tier from these providers. You grow a little bit more, you start getting revenue, you ramp up. You ramp up more, you ramp up more. Pretty soon you're the Amazon size, okay? So it gives businesses the ability to have equal footing when it comes to technology. Okay? The last 2 areas here are intermediaries, so someone that collects information and sells it to others. Yelp's a great example of this, okay? Yelp doesn't go out and do reviews of restaurants. You and I go and give reviews of restaurants. Yelp then sells services to those restaurants and other people in order to make money. Then we've got subscription, where we sell digital products to customers. So the Wall Street Journal, business journals, that sort of thing. Apple Music, Spotify, these sorts of things. Okay? Now there are different e-commerce categories. The most common that we hear about are business to consumer, or B2C, and business to business, B2B. Okay? But we also have some C to whatever businesses where the consumer is having a business. So example would be Etsy. Then we also have government type e-commerce. Okay? But we do have a wide variety of different e-commerce categories. So with B2C, we have the ability to share information, do ordering, support payments, do fulfillment, and have support. With B2B, we have different types of B2B commerce. So we can have a seller-side marketplace. So things like an e-procurement system, companies have these. So when I worked for Oracle, if I wanted to buy pens from Office Depot, I didn't go to Office Depot's website. Okay? I didn't go to an admin assistant and say, buy me pens. Okay? I went to our ERP system, our enterprise system, and I went in and I said, I want to order office supplies. Then it would do what's called a punch out. Okay? It would punch out to, we call it Office Depot's website. A special version, though, not the public version, where we had our special negotiated pricing. I would go through and pick the items just like I would on their regular site, add them to my cart. When I was ready to check out, I click check out. It would take me back to our ERP system, and it would generate a purchase order, and it would go through the approval process. Okay? So that's a seller-side marketplace. A buyer-side marketplace is where we have requests for quotes. Okay, so a buyer goes out and puts a request for quotes out on a marketplace, and then sellers come to the buyer and solicit their products. Then we also have third-party exchange marketplaces where they're not controlled by either the buyer or the seller, and they can have different types. So the first type is vertical, where these are focused on an industry. So a great example from the COVID days is healthcare companies, hospitals, doctors, whatever. They go to a purchasing marketplace for the healthcare industry where they can purchase supplies. Well, why can't they purchase it off the internet in general? Because they're not available to us. I was just at Target earlier. I'm still looking for wipes. Okay? I found some today. 1 per person. That's not going to do it for a doctor's office. Okay? So How did the doctor's office get the supplies that they need? They have to order through a specific industry marketplace where those supplies are made available. Horizontal, where it's specific to a particular function. Okay, so as an example, if I'm the IT department, there may be a horizontal marketplace for IT software, okay? And it covers all areas of IT software. Okay? E-commerce technologies, payments. So we use credit cards today. Sometimes people use checks, not very often. PayPal, Android Pay, Apple Pay, micropayments, and then the no longer around ones I already talked about. Right? And then web marketing. Make sure you look at the terms in the book on page 188. But things like mobile marketing, targeting ads and targeting the experience to the mobile device. Search engine optimization or SEO. So, what are the keywords? Page titles, inbound links, outbound links, tracking things. What is the content? Doing content marketing. Social commerce, so selling things using social media. Okay? There's only one thing in my entire life that I've ever bought through social media, and it's a piece of software to do animated slides for teaching. And I never would have found it otherwise. It just happened, for whatever reason, just kept popping up, and I decided to buy it. And the students loved it in the class earlier this summer. It's not conducive to this particular class. And then the last thing is social media information systems. So we can use things like Hootsuite. Right? We can use that to manage social media. So if you get a chance, you can go to Hootsuite's website and see if you're able to enroll in this free student program. They may or may not accept you into that program. But that gives you an opportunity to get free certifications on social media if you're a marketing person. And that company, again, is Hootsuite. Hoot like an owl hoots, suite. Okay. That's it for chapter 8.